What up, Fantastics? Last time I showed you websites and places where you can find your rental apartment here in Finland, and today we are going to continue on the topic because today I'm going to share you 8 pro tips what to consider when renting the apartment here in Finland. Let's go check it out. What up, Fantastics? Welcome to another video. In case you're here for the first time, welcome. My name is Aleksi and make fantastic videos about Finnish culture, lifestyle and language. So if you're into those kind of topics, make sure to hit the subscribe. And the tip number 1 is define your ideal apartment. And the tip number 1 is define your ideal apartment. Because first things first, before you even start to look for an apartment, you need to define what kind of ideal aspects you are requiring for your place. For example, the size, the location, the number of rooms, and so on. And the tip what I personally encourage you to do is to choose the location that is close to the public transportation stations. For example, here in Helsinki, consider the train and metro station or even tram stations, because this way you can get the rent down, because the more further away from the center you live, the cheaper the rent will get, but you still have the accessibility and the convenience via the public transportation. And tip number 2, this is important, don't rent the place before you've seen it yourself. And unfortunately here in Finland we also have sometimes these scams with rental apartments. So someone posts like a really kick-ass dream, over-the-top place with super affordable rent, like too good to be true, and then when someone pays the deposit before seeing the place, it turns out the whole apartment doesn't even exist. So never ever sign a contract or pay a deposit, we're going to talk about the deposit soon, before you've seen the place. A typical scam characteristic is that the lessor or the renter is super urgent, like they're super busy, they want to rent it quickly, they don't have any extra photos to show, or they just come up with some excuse that they can't show you the place. But if you see these kind of things, be careful, because this might be a scam. But the rule of thumb is always go see the place first before making any decisions. Tip number 3 is try to avoid those mass viewings. Some of the lessors organize these public viewings where people can come and see the place, and that way the lessor also tries to figure out who is the best candidate. But unfortunately those can be really competitive depending on the place. There can be tens of people trying to get the same place, and as a foreigner you all are already in a disadvantage a little bit. And I've also been to a few of these and I've lost all of those, so always try to arrange a private meeting with the lessor. So get in touch with them and ask like, hey, I'm interested in this place, when I come to check it. And yeah, so, but it depends on the lessor. Some prefer these private ones and some prefer the public ones, but the private ones are definitely much easier to stand out and score the place for yourself. And tip number 4 is the rent. And as you can expect, the rent is paid obviously once a month, and depending on the contract it can already include, for example, water fee and internet. And usually the electricity needs to be paid separately, and you need to make the contract yourself. But that's actually very easy, and the lessor you can usually give the instructions how to do it. And depending on mikä se on taloyhtiö, I'll put the word here. Depending on the taloyhtiö, they might already have broadband installed there, so you can get internet for free or super high speeds for very cheap price. But some other fees that might not be included in the rent is, for example, sauna fee and, for example, laundry room. In my previous place, the sauna cost like 15 euros a month, once a week, so it's actually kind of expensive for that matter. And the laundry costs 5 euros a month, and you could just use it unlimitedly. You just have to book the time there. And also important here is to make sure to ask the lessor like what is included in the rent and what is not. Keep that in mind. And the tip number 5 is the security deposit. A very typical practice here in Finland with the rental apartments is that when you are renting an apartment, the lessor usually requires you to pay the deposit. And this deposit is usually between 1 to 3 months of rent. So for example, if the rent is 700 euros, 2 months deposit would be 1,400 euros, and 3 months deposit would be 2,100 euros. And basically what you do is you put this in a separate bank account, and in case you break something in the apartment during your rental agreement, the lessor has the right to withdraw completely or partially the deposit money and pay the damages from that. And obviously if everything's all right, when you leave the apartment you will get full amount of the deposit money back to you. So it's basically just to cover the lessor's ass in case something bad might happen. And this is very important to take account into the cost when you're calculating your expenses, because it can be actually quite heavy cost, because you have to pay like 1,500 euros up front. So you need to make sure you have actually that kind of money on your So make sure to take this into account when you are calculating the cost, because 1,500 euros is actually quite a lot of money, and you need to put that aside when you want the apartment. So keep that in mind as well. And this deposit is quite easy to do. For example, you can do it via your own bank. So you just create a separate bank account, and then you do this kind of like this pledging agreement, and then you just go from there. But it's very easy to do. Tip number 6 is the length of your agreement. Usually there's 2 types of lengths for rental agreements. It's either fixed or indefinite. And the fixed means simply that you have a fixed length, for example 12 months. So after 12 months the contract will be terminated. But the indefinite one is just that it's valid for now, like until you terminate it yourself or the lessor terminates it. For example, if you come here as an exchange student, you will probably get like 6 months or 12 months fixed term. But if you move here to Finland for good, then probably indefinite length is the one you want to go with. And again, something to keep in mind is that when you terminate, if you want to move, there's usually 1 month notice. So for example, today is, what's the date? Today it's 23rd of March. So if I was to terminate my contract today, the notice will start at the beginning of the next month, which would be in April. So if I terminated the contract today, I would still have to stay in the place next month, or I had to pay the next month's rent at the very least. So keep that in mind. But if the lessor or your landlord or landlady terminates it, then it's usually 3 months notice. So you have a little bit more time to find a new place. And if you've been living in the place more than a year, then it's 6 months notice if the lessor terminates it. So when you're moving out, make sure to take this notice into account so you don't get any unexpected surprises. And the tip number 8 is the contract itself. Always make a written contract and never accept an oral one, because it can be really difficult to prove what you've kind of agreed on afterwards. And the lessors usually have their templates ready, so it's actually quite simple, and the contracts themselves are not really that complicated. Just make sure and ask the lessor if they can make it in English, because if you don't know Finnish, it will be much easier for both parties to understand. And it's also very typical here in Finland that there's no middlemen involved. So usually you just deal with the lessor directly. But for example, if you're a student and you get from the student housing association, then it's like an organization who takes care of the stuff. Or if you get these housing companies like Sato, then you also agree with directly. But if you get a place from the private market, it's very typical just to deal with the lessor directly and agree things from there. And last time I showed you websites and places where you can find those rental websites, so make sure to check out the video here and make sure to subscribe to join our fantastic squad and get all the future videos to yourself. See you next time. Moro moro.